Well, a hearty shalom to you, Jeffrey Seif here. Looking at some facts about Acts, we're in the 10th chapter, and we're going to plow the text of verses 24 through 43. Great story here. This is the third of what will be a four-part treatment on it. It's a fascinating story at a variety of levels. The background is there's a guy named Cornelius who's of non-Jewish extract, a centurion. But he is someone who's, though non-Jewish, was in love with the Jewish people and fell in love with the God of Israel, and he's kindly disposed toward the people and the God of Israel. Great story, and I'm sure that a lot of people that would go click and want to watch a video like this can relate to the fellow. Well, he beckons Peter to come his way, and Peter is a little ethnocentric. You know, he's a racist, in effect. He's a nationalist from the Galilee, and he didn't have a lot of experience with Gentiles. You know, Jesus told the group to go into all the world, but they really didn't go. You know, God has to get behind and kind of push it. You know, we all have prejudices, and Peter's no exception. Well, Peter has a vision about the blanket coming down, and he beckoned to engage that food product, and Peter is all resistant. This is in the previous passage, but he kind of plays his hand here and explains that he sees that through the vision the Lord was showing him to not be prejudiced against non-Jews, to push them a little beyond the kosherate laws was the way that happened. In any case, in verse 24, Peter goes to Cornelius' home in Caesarea, and we're told that Cornelius was waiting and that he had called together his relatives and close friends to come and hear Peter. And let me tell you, that's how it works a lot of times. I mean, I'm all about getting the word out. We can go in the streets and pass out leaflets and talk to strangers, and rightly we should extend concerns religious to all sorts of people. But a lot of stuff flows down webs of relationships. You are credible within a web of relationships, personal and professional. And if you have a transformed life, you use your influence to tell the story, and it has a way of roping in those in proximity. Well, that's what happens here. And so they're there waiting at Cornelius' beckoning. And then when Peter comes in, we're told, and I like this in verse 25, Cornelius met him and fell at his feet and worshiped him. He thought, here comes this holy man, let me just give him these honors. And Peter goes, well, I'm just a man. You know, religious leaders wouldn't often give it up like that because people enjoy the sense of being a little larger than life. I had observed that when you become a professor, you have doctor in front of your name. People think you're a little smarter, a little better. I worked and still work in television. And because you appear on a screen, people think you're a little larger and better. And it gets into the heads and hearts of people, and it has a way of corrupting them. Happily, Peter's not corrupted by it all. And hopefully at 62 and a half, I've gotten the better of a lot of that myself. In any case, in verse 27, we're told that talking with them, Peter went inside and found many people gathered. That's a bit superfluous. It was already noted that Cornelius gathered a crowd. And he said, you yourselves know that it is not permitted for a Jewish man to associate with a non-Jew or to visit him. Yet God has shown me that I should call no one unholy or unclean. My wife and I had to talk about this recently. Earlier in the chapter, there's a story of a blanket coming down with unkosher foods, and there's a voice, eat Pete. You know, and Peter is kind of chagrined by that. No, I can't eat that stuff. Then the blanket goes up and comes back down, eat Pete. And the text is often used to indicate that dietary laws are no longer in vogue for Jewish believers. We're kind of pushed beyond that. What Peter says about the vision is less about what he can and can't eat, as much as he says the Lord used it to show him that he shouldn't be calling people unclean. It's not about unclean foods, it's about unclean dudes. You know, he shouldn't himself be prejudicial against those Gentiles. And the Lord used the vision not to tell Peter that he can, when he goes to the lunch menu, he can get a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. The Lord used the vision to tell Peter that he needs to push beyond ethnic boundaries. That's the way he understands it, the way he interprets it according to the story. Well, there's niceties that are exchanged, and in verse 34, Peter opens his mouth and he says, I truly understand that God is not one to show favoritism, but in every nation, the one who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. It's a very interesting text because the way that Peter was beckoned into Cornelius' world, the messenger said, listen, this guy Cornelius, he's a Gentile, but he loves the Jewish people. He's a God seeker. He's a pious, righteous guy. And this is Peter's way of saying that he realizes, Peter does now, that there are good people as people who aren't Jewish. I mean, it seems odd because I know I'm talking to many people like that. Of course, there are individuals like myself and my wife of Jewish extract who've accepted Jesus that would watch a video like this. But similarly, there are individuals of non-Jewish extract that are attracted to a story like this, and thus you're sitting there watching it. You can relate to this story right here because when you're looking in Acts chapter 10, this is the first person of non-Jewish extract that gets involved in the story, and what a story it is. Peter goes on in verse 42 and says that this God, he has commanded us to proclaim to the people and to testify that he is the one ordained by God as judge of the living and the dead. He's referencing Jesus, who he had spoken about earlier. And he goes on to say in verse 43, all the prophets testify about him. That's one of the things that we really wanted to underscore when we did the Tree of Life translation of the Bible, which I'm holding in my hand. This isn't just the large print edition, it's the reference edition. And I had the opportunity as the vice president of the corporation to go through and approve every cross-reference in this Bible. And there were a lot of cross-references. That wasn't a job that was done in a day. I took it on as the senior theologian, and the task is to really want to look at the stitching between the testaments. In many people's mind's eye, there's a wall between the Older Testament and the Newer Testament, and we were game to want to show the crossover in order that in verse 43, that this can become the more true that all the prophets testify about him. We were anxious to underscore how the Older Testament points to the Newer. Or there's an old saying, the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed, and the New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. We are interested in the blending of that story. And if you know individuals that need to appreciate that the more so, I can say that the Tree of Life version of the Bible is a good version to give. All the prophets testify about him, says Peter, that everyone who puts his trust in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. That is the good news, I should say. When he says everyone here, he really means everyone in a new light. Because Peter, prior to this, was much more predisposed to go to Jewish ones. Not everyone, but Jewish ones, because that was his comfort zone. But the Lord has kind of broken new ground in Peter's mind that he needs to push it out a little bit. And, the gospel story isn't just for Jews, it's good news for the world. And the emphasis in Acts is the gospel begins in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then pushes out to the ends of the world. And here we're looking at it breaking grounds beyond the Jewish world as we're getting into the hearts and minds of individuals of non-Jewish extract. And Peter says, I get it now, I see it. People do see clearly that the gospel is for the world, but they don't see clearly as how the gospel is for the Jews. It's a tragic turn. Thank you for helping us turn the tide, and thank you for going with me on a journey as we're taking a look at the book and looking at some facts about Acts. God bless.